Betsy and Thomas here for the American Intelligence Media, where we are decoding Trump tweets. And today, Thomas, I just want to focus in on one Trump tweet, and that is the death of George H.W. Bush.
I would love to address that topic.
Well, good, because I'm going to tee up these tweets for you, and then I want you to go ahead and start reading them. But by the way, did you hear that the new thing is not Pepe's, it's kitties?
Kitties?
Kitty
I
propaganda.
Love them, but guess what? Liberals are terrified of them. They're
Why
so
is it?
scary, those kitties, because they're irresistible. They're adorable. Who doesn't want to pet a little kitty? Come on. I mean, if you remember back to the beginning, I always said, if you could include a kitty in anything we're doing, that would make me happy. So.
And we did, and because also we're called Citizens Addicted to Truth, which spells cat. President George H.W. Bush led a long, successful, and beautiful life. Whenever was that a cat spitting out a hairball?
Yes, distinctly.
Yes. Whenever I was with him, I saw his absolute joy for life and true pride in his family. His accomplishments were great from beginning to end. He was a truly wonderful man and will be missed by all. I was very much looking forward to having a press conference just prior to leaving Argentina because we have had such great success in our dealing with various countries and their leaders at the G20. However, out of respect for the Bush family and former President George H.W. Bush, we'll wait until after the funeral to have a press conference. Where to start with George H.W. Bush? Should we start with his father, who was a Nazi? Should we start with him hanging out at the book depository when JFK was assassinated? Shall we talk about his 1,000 points of light and the attempted assassination on Ronald Reagan? Where shall we start with this man's corruption? Well, Thomas, a really good place would be the cover-up of 9/11, or did he help implement it?
How much tape do we got, Betsy? Because, if I start talking about George W. Bush, I don't know when I'll stop. But those highlights right there make him the evilest man in American history. So, yes, I had to throw up in my throat a little bit over Trump's tweet, but now I'm going to interpret it for you. And I await the day, Betsy, I truly do, that someone will interpret what it is that we say. Because when you read through the lines, you can see to the other side. What Mr. Trump was saying was that George W. Bush was the most successful criminal in U.S. history. What he was really saying is he has to kowtow to the man who started the rogue CIA being centered in the United States White House. Jimmy Carter was a tool of the rogue CIA. So was Nixon. But when it came to George H.W. Bush, he was already a CIA agent that was being completely covered through his oil deals, the Zapata oil deals and his offshore rigs, which are really nothing more than listening posts for the CIA and the attempted Bay of Pigs. And so George W. Bush was already one of the top active CIA agents working through the oil kingdoms and working through the Seven Sisters and Standard Oil, and then he started developing his own oil companies. He learned it from Edward Pauley and some other very corrupt people who, after World War II, were in charge of all of the energy sources for oil, and he learned how to get in and make money. So that's what he did, but he did it for the CIA. Now remember, when I say rogue CIA, there's a CIA that goes out that defends, basically, I'm sorry to have to say it, but this is the bottom line. The CIA does nothing more than defend U.S. corporations and stir up trouble so that then we have to call in the U.S. military. That's their job. And it's subversion, it's subterfuge, it's what the Jesuits taught them. Remember, our CIA, especially Counterintelligence Department, is based exactly upon the SS of Hitler's Nazi times, which based theirs upon the beautiful espionage of the Jesuits and the Vatican. And so what we see is Bush has to be lauded in the press. We're going to see everyone, including George Soros and his bagging eyelids and his baggy eyes, come out with his sagging flesh to say how wonderful George Bush is. Because why? He was part when you say George Soros, you're talking about the very person that was used as the number one economic tool for economic terrorism against the USSR, the former Soviet Republic, right? So, George Soros was who? Daddy Bush's right-hand man. And to this very day, the two of them are hand in glove. So when good old H.W., I don't even know what to call him. I like to call him Daddy Bush. Maybe I'll just call him Bush Sr. But then we're going to talk about his father, Prescott Bush, basically Nazi Bush. Averell Harriman and Brown Brothers and the Union Bank and giving the money to the Nazis. What Betsy said was all, that's it. That's the tip of the iceberg. You can go as deep as you want. But they did the same thing when they took down the USSR. They created a bank. And George H.W. Bush's brother created a bank called Velmet Bank. And that bank basically, they set USSR up to become more open and capitalistic. And then they ripped them off. They set them up with bad deals. They moved the gold to places where it was vulnerable and then it was taken. They moved that money into securities to try to turn the USSR leaders into oligarchs, exactly as they did then in Russia. It's the same exact story. What happened in the USSR and what is happening in Russia right now, except until Putin came to power, But formerly, the creation of the oligarchs in Russia, that was all the same group of people working out of the White House at first, and now it works out of what's called the Azerbaijani Chamber of Commerce. So if you want to know where the rogue CIA is, it's in Azerbaijan. And their airline, Silkways, always is caught up in any drug movement, any human trafficking, any military weapons movement, usually through Bulgaria and other countries that they can do dirty deals with. And so they're basically the biggest gun runners on the face of the earth, but then they have been attacking all the former satellites of the Soviet Republic and trying to go after them. And they've done a pretty darn good job in some cases. And so George W. Bush, Daddy Bush ain't dying. Daddy Bush created a criminal cabal, which I like to call the rogue CIA, the White House rogue CIA, right? And now, what happened? Remember, Bill Clinton was chosen. Well, first off, the Capone mob out of Chicago, that is Hillary. That's her dad, Hugh Rodham. I won't get into the details, but Bill Clinton was handpicked by the Rockefellers, the Rothschilds, and others. And the two of them came together in Little Rock to basically take over a state that had the least amount of oversight going on. And then it became the headquarters for all the black ops military, for all the drugs, the Iran-Contra scandal. Do not forget that was Daddy Bush that was behind all of that, telling Bill Clinton what to do. And so Hillary and Bill got linked up with the Chinese. The Chinese came in, gave Sam Walton infinite money, got Hillary on his board, paid position, and through Walmart, they got control of, I don't have to go into the details with you, right? Largest corporation, largest family corporation in the world. And so what are we talking about? When you say Bill Clinton, you say Bush. When you say Barack Obama, that's a little different. He too linked up with the Bushes, but he also was being strongly influenced by George Soros. Now, Hillary Clinton likes to play like she's going to listen to George Soros, and he does give her orders, and she does follow them, but she's got all of her own things going on too. So when you're talking about Daddy Bush, you're talking about a family that is so corrupt that his father was an open Nazi. They had to close his bank down.
Go into that more, but I don't know that a lot of people know about Prescott Bush.
Oh, I think people know about Prescott Bush
to some degree. What about the Walker family and the banking and the Harrimans?
Herbert Walker was so corrupt. Averell Harriman, Brown Brothers, and then Union Bank, that, we'll call it a rat line, was one of the biggest developments of corrupt banking in America that was able to bank with enemies of ours during the war. So Union Bank was closed because they were holding a great deal of the gold of the Germans, which again came up missing. Remember, the gold of the Germans came up missing. And some of it went to the Bank for International Settlements. Matter of fact, that was the core of the gold holdings of the Bank for International Settlement in Switzerland, which is so corrupt, it's absurd. That's the bank that backs derivatives, which are completely should be illegal. $500 trillion in betting on where money is going to go, and all coordinated through the same group of people who stole the German gold after the Germans stole the French gold. The French had a huge amount of gold.
Well, how was George Bush's grandfather or father involved in this?
Prescott Bush was one of the directors of Union Bank, and he worked with, I could get into the many great details, but he worked with, basically, let's just call them what they are. They were Nazis at the time. He worked with the enemy. His bank was closed because he was trading with the enemy. That's what the clause, that was what he was charged with. And they closed it, didn't matter, turned around and opened another bank. And so that was taught to Daddy Bush. That was taught to the dead Bush today's dead Bush, who I just want to say, in the most cruel fashion that I can, that it is a day of rejoicing. Because the beings in hell are rejoicing that one of their dearest sons is coming home to them. Because George H.W. Bush invented the Iraqi War. Invented it. Remember, he didn't get congressional support for that.
Think about all the millions of souls that will be weighing him down when he passes as he passed over.
I like the movie The Sixth Sense and a few others that show that at the moment of death, you're either shown a lovely tunnel of light and you walk to your relatives and then they introduce you to the angels and the archangels and you're just happy singing and given an instrument and you're just doing a great... Oh, no, or you're attacked the moment that you die by these black winged demons who are eating you. Because every time you hurt someone else, it's coming back for you. You cannot count the times that George H.W. Bush has hurt people. He has taken down countries, okay? He has killed more people than we know. He has stolen more wealth than anyone can imagine. And they bought the second largest aquifer in the world underground in Paraguay. He and Angela Merkel and the rest of his cabal, they all have a piece of this so that when they destroy the rest of the world, they can go to the place where there's fresh water. Plus, there's some really strange other things there, oil and other such things. That's where the rich people all are in this most undeveloped country in South America because, they don't want to deal with the rest of us. They're trying to kill us because there's too many of us. George H.W. Bush was a eugenist. He was a outright serial killer. He started war after war, which we're not talking about, the invisible bombing of Barack Obama, which was taught to him by who? The Bush criminal family, which is the, Daddy Bush, Baby Bush, Bill Clinton, Hillary Clinton, and then Barack Obama adding the Open Society more so than even Hillary did with George Soros' influence. So that's what's going to be at this stupid funeral for this ex-president who should be and will be in history seen as a criminal. He will be called what I'm describing. This is the way historians are going to describe this period, that we are a bunch of blind sheeple who allowed this to happen. Here's how it worked for me. In the days that Daddy Bush started running for office, it made me sick to hear his voice. I don't care whose house I was at. If I had to be there, I turned off the TV if George H.W. Bush was speaking because it was evil. Because he had subliminal programming going on, folks. How do you think a man who looks like that, who laughs about his evil content of what he delivers in a UN speech about the way he's taking over the world with the New World Order and there's nothing we can do, it is fait accompli. This is as evil as anyone has ever been in history. Hitler did not go to the United Nations and say he wanted a world George Bush-oriented hegemony at world control. Well, George Bush did. Daddy Bush went right up there and announced it and then continued to do it. He went to war with Iraq with a UN resolution, folks, after he set Iraq up by telling them it was okay for Iraq to go ahead and move into Kuwait and take what was rightfully theirs, which had been stolen before and got cut up in the Sykes-Picot Agreement and secret agreements after the Treaty of Versailles. So he said, yeah, go ahead, Saddam Hussein. Remember, who brought Saddam Hussein to Iraq? Daddy Bush. Who trained Al-Qaeda in Afghanistan? Daddy Bush. Who let the rogue CIA go crazy during his time when he, remember, oh my gosh, Betsy, please, would you tell him to look in the back room for more tape? I haven't even started. You just told me this and read that to me. I can go on for, I swear to heavens, I could go on for 8 hours listing the crimes of George H.W. Bush, because if you get into 911, then you get into a huge amount, hundreds of millions of dollars of basically fake stocks that he used to economically attack Russia. And then he got personal gain from it that went straight to his brother through Velvet Bank. And then who got it? Mitt Romney through Bain Capital, folks. Mitt Romney is he is a Bush. When you say unfit Mitt Romney, you are saying Bush criminal family. Now, we have done numerous anonymous patriots intelligence reports on this, more so than anyone else that I know of. And we have showed you the exact reasons, not the cause, well, the cause and the reasons and the a priori situation that was going on with 911. I can't tell you exactly how they did it, because that's still speculation in the minds of practically anyone, because it was all I can tell you is everything I see is an anomaly. I see no truth. And remember, it was Robert Mueller, who was the head of the FBI, who was supposed to be looking into that, who turned the other way and said it's Islamic terrorists from Iraq. And out of those 19 Islamic terrorists from Iraq, John Brennan signed 12 of their expedited visas, which was given and created by one of, you're going to hear me talking about the Vulcans, James Baker. James Baker was the personal lawyer of Daddy Bush. He knew nothing about anything, and then he was raised into one of the most powerful positions as a Vulcan. The Vulcan was a group of people around Daddy Bush that were part of him as his ascent when he came to be the vice president. Now remember, he was put in charge of the committee to find the vice president that was to run with Reagan. And what did he say? I'm running. He looked at everything. And then he wiped out his history so no one knew that he had been the head of the CIA. No one knew he'd been an oil man working with the CIA. No one knew he'd been involved in international deals. No one knew that he was he was one of the 6 team leaders on the day of the death of John F. Kennedy. But it seems as if, since he was standing on the book depository steps, as Betsy has said, someone waved the Secret Service off of the car. No, who can do that? Who can wave the Secret Service off of protecting John F. Kennedy on his car and not running alongside of it? Probably Daddy Bush. That's how powerful he was, folks. He appears in multiple documents that day. He appears as being one of the coordinators of the 6 groups. He was there the night before with the group that met the powerful leaders that actually created JFK's death, which is a very complicated story I don't want to get into. But Daddy Bush was right there. He was then caught as a hobo on a train, dressed as a hobo, leaving the city. He was in a suit, standing on the steps. He made 2 calls that day to report in. He made sure that there was an ad that day saying an oil man was giving a talk from Zapata Oil so that it was his cover for being in town that day, but he didn't give the talk. I mean, come on. Don't get me started. Then he became the vice president, and then he tried to kill Reagan. Tried to assassinate Reagan. That's who we're talking about. They're going to laud him. They're going to praise him. They're going to say stuff that will make me vomit. I won't be able to watch that on television, not 1 second of it. It's like watching Hollywood actors and actresses, con jobs, all of them, come out and make political statements as if they aren't bought and paid for. It's just disgusting. It makes you want to vomit. So I try to keep away from the TV, because Daddy Bush was part of the group that allowed subliminal programming to enter into every single commercial, and he used it in all of his presidential runs and in his debates and everything else. Go back, look at the tapes. You will hear in your mind birds singing and a brook flowing by and a beautiful white-capped mountain in the background when Daddy Bush speaks, when he's running for president. And all the opponents, it's like you hear horrible things. That's because the CIA was part of his presidential campaign, and because subliminal programming had been perfected at that time so that they can make you think anything they want. That's how that disgusting person, just take a look at him. He is an ugly, ugly man in every single way that you can imagine. And look at his children. I'm sorry, but they are special. People don't realize this. George Bush Jr., until 5th grade, was a special ed student. And the only reason he wasn't is his father intervened afterwards so that it wouldn't go on his record. His fake Air Force National Guard time and his cocaine use is well documented. And anyone who reports on it loses their job. That's the way that it used to be. You weren't allowed to talk about the Bushes in any bad way. You weren't allowed to say, oh, wait, the president? Daddy Bush? His daddy was Hitler's best buddy? World War II continued on because of Daddy Bush's daddy? Grandpa Prescott Bush killed how many untold amounts of Americans as he financed the war for Hitler? And yet, his son becomes president? And then Daddy Bush's brother becomes the leader of Velvet Bank that takes down Russia? And they steal the money personally and invest it in oil? Now, I could go on and on and on, but when Daddy Bush was the vice president, he tried to kill Ronald Reagan. And when that didn't work, and I'm sorry to have to tell you this in case you don't know this, but I used to be an advisor, a counselor for Ronald Reagan through his wife. And so I know what I'm talking about. I have direct experience. Daddy Bush took over the White House because he created an executive order that said that Daddy Bush, not Ronald Reagan, was in charge of foreign policy for America. So, folks, when you want to say Ronald Reagan took down Russia and the wall, no, he didn't. He didn't have jack to do with that. That was Daddy Bush. And I want to clarify a mistake that I made the other day. The 1,000 points of light was a stolen remark that Daddy Bush used in his inaugural speech. And I said the other day that Ronald Reagan referred to the 1,000 points of light. Incorrect. He referred to the 1,000 bright eyes. And it's a completely different. Or the 30,000 bright eyes. And that's what I said I tracked when I was in the military. And that's true. But I called them points of light. That's because of the joke that Daddy Bush was always blamed for stealing that. But he didn't even write that speech. And the person who did steal it even said she later was attributed to stealing it for someone else, and now we know it was someone else they stole it from. So the 1,000 points, like a beautiful city on the hill with 1,000 points of light. Yeah, right. Daddy Bush, you never said anything nice to anyone in your life. And your wife was one of the most evil people. I'm sorry, she's not a politician, so I have to be careful. But she was Aleister Crowley's moonchild. Who doesn't know that? And that's the reason they had retarded children. Look at the way Jeb walks. He can't walk straight. Look at the way Baby Bush was special education until 5th grade, poor grades throughout the rest of his life, failed all kinds of things. Even though he was backed by the Saudi royal family, the Sauds, Baby Bush failed in all of his oil ventures. Now his father, Daddy Bush, through the money that he got through Edwin Pauley and stealing other people's money through oil companies that he basically ripped off in California, he learned how to do what's called pump and dump. And so his companies would always make a bunch of money and then lose a bunch of money. Oh, but he had already sold his stocks by the time the company loses the money. So Daddy Bush had all kinds of oil companies. Zapata Oil was only the last one that didn't fail because the CIA was supporting it, because those were listening stations. All the offshore, all the drillings, everything. It was kind of a fake company, but there was some oil flowing. So Daddy Bush, after he ran Reagan's 6 years after, basically the whole show the whole time, because Reagan was remember, he was a con man. Nothing he ever said was sincere. But boy, it sounded like everything he said was sincere. And he memorized his lines and delivered them better than any president in history. Why? He was an actor. From Reagan on, we had nothing but Hollywood production, Disney World production presidential personality contest. That's it. Personality contest. That's it. Whoever for a short period of time could tell the lies that made people happy and had enough money through corrupt election. Lordy, the Bush and corrupt election. That's what Nixon was actually. It wasn't Watergate spying. What was in the files was the Zapata oil and the Mexican oil election fraud campaign money. It was illegal election campaign money that was being covered up. And it was Daddy Bush who told Nixon, you have to step down because if you don't, the entire mechanism for our funding for elections completely comes to a halt. That's the reason Nixon left office. Because it was the Mexicans still, to this day. Look at Carlos Slim. Don't even get me started. But let's just say that the Mexicans at this point still deeply involved in election campaign money fraud on a huge way. And that's the reason that we act like they're our friends when they're not. And the Bushes, deeper than anybody involved in that. So deeply involved, don't get me started. It's that bad. Now, he was the vice president, and he's the one who attacked all other countries with the CIA. He made the CIA into such a huge organization that many CIA members left and became private corporations. It was Daddy Bush who took intelligence agencies and put them on steroids. And when he was no longer the president, he had 4 of them himself. And 2 of them were so powerful, they were probably as powerful as the CIA because they worked out of Azerbaijan, so they had infinite money because they had stolen so much liquid gas and oil, and simply by the way that it flows, not by doing any work. No. This is the Chamber of Commerce. This is Dick Cheney. This is Daddy Bush. This is Zbigniew Brzezinski. This is General Secord. These are the dudes who are so evil that their evil has now been implanted in their children and will carry on. It's just like George Soros. These are dynasties of evil. So when we say the Vulcans, they weren't kidding. They thought they were so evolved, they took a Star Trek concept that when you're at the end of human evolution, you're a Vulcan, and they thought that's who they are. They thought they deserved every bit of the money that they got, no matter how many people died for it. So once H.W. Bush, Daddy Bush, vice president, he got it all set up. The CIA went completely nuts, and the rogue CIA basically took over international discord. And George Soros became the number 1 economic terrorist in the world. And the guy that he helped take down the USSR with the Vulcans, Leo Wanta, went on the run and started to tell the truth. And he's been haunted and chased, and now I believe he's been replaced. But that's another story, another day. Let's just say there's another George Soros out there that no one knows anything about, and that his name is Leo Wanta, but he was a good guy. But it doesn't matter. He manipulated countries' currencies so he could collapse them, and hundreds of thousands of people died from hunger alone. And George Soros has done this 14 times with the aid of the rogue CIA, which was created by Daddy Bush. And they're going to laud him in the few days. They're going to give him a presidential funeral, and they're going to lower the flags because we live in an age of disinformation. We live in an age of political untruth. We live in an age of such chaos that if you don't learn the mechanism of discernment, you will possibly go crazy if you try to figure it out. So that's why we try to tell you what the Conclave has figured out, and the hundreds of people in the research with Americans for Innovation have figured out. And you can't believe it. Betsy's team is so huge. Every day it blows my mind. The things she tells me when I come here, the things she reads me, I can't even believe it because we have reached further than you can possibly imagine. And we have to, because the evil is so apparent and it's so easy to foil. And that's what people don't understand. Oh my gosh, the evil of George H.W. Bush. I'm now painting the hugest monster Goliath in history. Guess what? Take a knife and slice Goliath's Achilles heel. And he will be like a worm. And that's what giants forget. They get so big that they make huge mistakes. I'm going to tell you some of the mistakes of Daddy Bush. Once he was the president, he was a terrible president. He went to war without congressional approval. He manipulated the National Defense Authorization Act and taught his son and all subsequent Bush rogue CIA White House cabal members how to do this. He set up the institution to make sure that the White House would be so crooked that all they would be concerned about is where do they get their money after they're the president, because they saw all the rat lines of money, evil and good, and they want to put a tax on it. And that's what the Clinton Foundation is. That's why Obama did not leave office until he had the silly cons in Silicon Valley promise and give $2 billion for his fake library. He didn't leave office till he had his $2 billion in hand, folks, because that's what he learned from the Bush criminal family cabal. It's like the Russian oligarchs, except over here, it's all supported by what we would call the status quo of the bureaucracy, the politicians who are there for life, because we don't have term limits, because we also have at the head of every federal agency a senior executive service member who is part of a paramilitary organization that is equal to the SS, that is equal to the 10,000 Jesuits. It's interesting. It only takes 10,000 to rule any country completely. And right here, we see it with the SES. 10,000 appointees, over 8,000 of them being Obama appointees. Resistance, this is the resistance, folks. This is the shadow government. These are people who are paid more than civil servants. And this is what George H.W. Bush put into place. He put it into place so strongly that he added more members than anybody ever could have imagined when it was first set up. The SES was set up for intelligence, SIS, the Senior Intelligence Service, not the Senior Executive Service, which then eventually, with Michael Hayden's support, even got to rule the NSA. That's right, folks. Civilians can be appointed to run the NSA who don't even know what a code is, who don't know that they're breaking the Geneva Convention, who only do what they're told politically, and that is George Bush Sr. who created that. He created the institutionalization of it, and I could go on, but he became president, and at that point, he saw the lay of the land. He saw the fake gold holdings of the Rothschilds in the bullion vault there in the city of London. He saw the fake gold vaults in Nova Scotia. He saw the Zurich gold. He saw all this, and he saw that the CIA, of course, had already captured the Yamashita gold. And that's, by the way, the reason that he took over the rogue CIA is because of the Yamashita gold, the German gold, because why? His daddy held half of the German gold. Okay, we're dealing with a lineage of evil, a dynasty of evil, folks. So the myth that there is German gold, just look up the Hammer, or the Hammer Project, or Bush's, or the German gold, or Yamashita gold, or the Bank for International Settlement. It's all there. And it continues to this very day. If I get too detailed, I will go on. Literally, go get some more tape, Betsy. Get some of your team to go get more. I literally could go on probably for days because I witnessed this. And it made me want to vomit every time I witnessed it. It's one of the reasons I stopped watching television altogether was because of George H.W. Bush's voice. It was so awful, but through subliminal manipulation, everyone was lulled to sleep by it. And I saw that they would go into trance. And then I saw that also with others afterwards. Anyone that is chosen, make sure that George Soros's $200 million campaign in the last 2 weeks of just this last midterm, which was focused a great deal on the ones who were in the news, but also Secretary of States because they control the vote rigging. $200 million in subliminal programming, super PAC commercials. That's what we have. We have a Hungarian-born Nazi who was a Nazi and put his own family and his own relatives and his own neighbors into concentration camps, who then claims to be an American who doesn't pay any taxes, George Soros, running major sections of our political government. Why? Because Daddy Bush is dying, and George Soros has taken over. And George Soros is more rogue than the rogue CIA. He works through the British Privy Council. He tells them what to do. He tells the European Union what to do. He told Hillary and Podesta what to do. Does anyone understand that George Soros has taken over for George Bush Sr.? And remember, George Bush Sr. used Masonic rituals to beg Trump to stop the last time that he was in Trump's presence. He pulled out a white flag and he raised it in surrender. He used the all hail call of the Masons. I know these symbols very well. So George Bush Sr. came and begged Trump to stop, and he wouldn't stop. So Trump is the disruptor. He's disrupted the old guard. He's disrupted, because remember, you don't need to remember. Let me first say this. Baby Bush does not paint any of those paintings of those fallen warriors. And if you believe that, then you believe in the New World Order and that George Bush Sr. was going to rule the world. I mean, he tried, and he convinced people, and he got the UN to create all these resolutions that Obama has signed on for without the Congress ever signing on. He got the UN to take us into war repeatedly. He steals more money from we the people through the UN than imaginable. People don't even know. Unbelievable. The debt of the U.S. Federal Reserve is because of the World Bank, of the UN, the World Trade Organization. We're paying for China. When we pay our debt to the U.S. Federal Reserve, that's the reason it's a bogus debt. It's a debt that we should simply default upon. But George Bush, of course, what did he do? He was involved. The Bushes were involved in Enron. I don't know if you remember Enron, the biggest election fraud scandal in U.S. history, but it barely got reported. If you remember, the Bushes never disclosed who donated to them, especially Baby Bush, because Enron donated so much. And then Enron went bankrupt, and it went into a group called Intercontinental Exchange that now owns the New York Stock Exchange, the commodity markets, both in Chicago and New York, the derivative markets, and all the clearinghouses. One group, Intercontinental Exchange. If you do not think that the Bushes are directly involved in that, pinch yourself. So Daddy Bush, once he got it all set up and saw, from the biggest level, the way that it works, and he was moving money around through U.S. aid, moving money around through OPIC. He made sure OPIC was just basically infinitely funded. And now it's being closed down. U.S. aid is being completely transformed by Trump. The United Nations, which was stealing all that money and doing the opposite of what they said in every single case, that's ending. So the Bush dynasty is ending. And I don't know if Trump will go to this funeral. I hope not, but he probably will, because he is part of the Republican tradition. But remember that Ronald Reagan, from the second year on, had Alzheimer's, and all of that he could remember is short-term stuff. He would read those lectures he was going to give, or those speeches, and go out and deliver them perfectly without a note. Afterwards, don't ask him his name. When he was called into Iran-Contra, they asked him, and his answer 127 times, I believe it was, I don't remember. And he honestly did not. It was Nancy Reagan that was a stand-in for him, and she used all kinds of counselors. And the show was ran by Daddy Bush. Then when he became president, through subliminal control and through CIA manipulation, he basically cleaned out America the gold, and afterwards he set up a fake gold company, Barrick Gold. And who did he set it up with? Adnan Khashoggi, the uncle of the chopped up Khashoggi, who was the minister of truth, basically, while Adnan Khashoggi was the head of the Saudi Arabian intelligence agency. Okay? We're talking about the number one arms dealer in the world was the head of the Saudi Arabian intelligence agency and was Daddy Bush's best friend. And they opened Barrick Gold with 2 fake gold mines in America. And then they said they had other ones in Canada, Australia, and Switzerland, which they don't. They never had any gold. And they wrote and became the third largest gold producer in the world using paper gold only, saying that their gold was in the ground. And so they wrote paper future notes on it. The biggest scam in gold of the time. And then, of course, he merged with others in Canada, did the same there. He did things with oil. And then what did he do? He joined, through Halliburton. Okay. The Carlyle Group owned Halliburton and 399 other military subsidiaries, all of which were getting no-bid contracts with the federal government. Halliburton never had anyone bid against their multiple contracts in Iraq, which Daddy Bush gave them. And then it continued on. Same thing with KBR. These were owned by Carlyle Group. Daddy Bush went from being a millionaire to a billionaire in 1 year by joining the Carlyle Group. Tony Blair joined the Carlyle Group. The head of the Philippines joined the Carlyle Group. All of these crooked heads of state joined the Carlyle Group, and they made money from both sides through militarization. They started their own. Bush started 4 separate intelligence agencies, and he continued to work through the rogue CIA, through the Azerbaijani Chamber of Commerce and the Vulcans, which runs to this very day. And so Daddy Bush, on the Carlyle Group, made untold amounts of money, and the entire Carlyle Group made amazing amounts of money with 911, Homeland Security, with creating an army in Jordan. You name it, whatever you want to name it, doesn't matter. The Carlyle Group was there. If it had to do with oil, weapons, or anything weaponized, the Carlyle Group was there. And then when they were found out, and Halliburton and others kind of separated, they went and dissolved into kind of multiple organizations as they learned from the Brits. The Britons do this. This is how they do it. A company that's completely illegal just goes bankrupt and dissolves into some companies that had already been prepared ahead of time and no one even knows they exist. It's going to take you a while to find them out. That's what's happening with Serco. That's what happened with Strategic Communication Laboratories, Cambridge Analytical. That's what happened with Cambridge Intelligence Group. They just dissolved. Oh, no, they didn't. They just went to other groups, other asset management groups. Who was the king of that? Daddy Bush. Because Daddy Bush was taught by the bankers. And when we're talking about the bankers, we're talking about the guys who run America, who run world commerce. And we could go into great detail, but let's just say the people who do make money personally off the U.S. Federal Reserve, which is not U.S., it is not federal, and it is not a reserve, and it is not public, and we do not own it, folks. It is owned by the same people who own the biggest banks and the Fortune 500 companies. But go to look for their names, you won't find their names. You'll find asset management companies. You'll find these type of British groups that are created to simply move money between one of 20 companies named Blackstone. They'll have literally 20, 30 asset management companies so that nobody pays any taxes. That's Daddy Bush. Offshore banking went nuts during his time. You have the hedge fund managers coming in. You have derivatives coming in. You have all of the evil of globalism coming into America to gut America. That's what we should be talking about at the funeral of George Herbert Walker Bush. Not what a great president he was. Not the way he stood up to Saddam Hussein. He planted Saddam Hussein there. And he did a terrible job of finding him. And he did a terrible job of fighting him. And the setup with Kuwait was simply to get the Kuwaiti gold. Everybody knows that. Anyone who's got any discernment who looks at what that war was about will know the following. That George H.W. Bush told Saddam Hussein when he amassed soldiers on the Kuwaiti border and threatened our State Department that he was going to take Kuwait, George H.W. Bush said, "It's not our concern. Do what you want." Before he crossed 1 minute over that border, we attacked and pushed him back. And at the same time, which is really, really very unknown, The Kuwaiti oil fields, the pumps, all went into flame. And we had one of the biggest pollutions happen on the face of the earth in human history. Those were set by our own soldiers, because they all went off within minutes of Saddam Hussein's tanks crossing the border. They didn't even have time to get to those oil rigs. And they all went off at the same time, and they went off professionally. Why? Because Daddy Bush's personal friend was the only person allowed to come put those oil wells fires out. He hired a little Texas company that had never done it before to come and to try to do it. We spent more money putting those oil wells out than we did on Daddy Bush's shock and awe first UN-approved attack of Iraq. That's right, folks. Do you think Daddy Bush didn't get a kickback from his personal friend who slowly learned how to put these oil rig fires out? We could have put them out instantaneously. We're the ones who set them. That's what Daddy Bush did. And then the gold of Kuwait, I love the way that went down. Half the gold of Kuwait, I believe they were, in terms of oil countries, one of the largest holders of gold bullion in the world, one of the richest countries in the world, because they were at the end of the pipelines. And so they got to charge all the oil coming through without doing any of the work, loaded up on the boats, and just become so filthy rich. They were like Yemen was at one point. Kuwait was like Yemen was. Yemen to Saudi Arabia was Kuwait to Iraq. And so what it was really a taxing station, you see. And so Saddam Hussein was right to say that Kuwait always had belonged to, well, it's more than just Iraq, but that kingdom. So Daddy Bush said, go ahead, attack. And then what did you see? You got to see us empty our arsenals on the retreating Iraqi army. You got to see us use accelerated particle beams. You got to see us use things in space that have never been used before. And those are the 30,000 bright eyes in the sky that Reagan put there. Sometimes he would call them the 1,000 bright eyes. That's different than the 1,000 lights on the hill. But the deal is, the 1,000 bright eyes were put there by the guy who made the mistake stealing the idea of 1,000 lights on the hill, Daddy Bush. So Daddy Bush was responsible for that. He set up the evil that cannot be stopped unless we basically do what Trump is doing. Abnegate all of the executive orders that have come before that was setting the White House up as the sole director of the federal government and the District of Columbia, which would have been under martial law. We are under two national emergencies, and those national emergencies, because of the executive orders that Obama clumped together in his last hours in his office, make this more than martial law. Trump can call our own soldiers to our southern border because of this national emergency. There are actually 3 national emergencies going on right now. That's the only way to stop this, is to have a good president who turns around and uses it the opposite way that Hillary was going to use it. Folks, NAFTA was to become the American Union, just like Europe became the European Union. NAFTA was to become George Soros' control of Canada, America, Mexico, and Central America. That's the reason George Soros is spending so much money sending 5 million invaders from Central America. Now, he couldn't get 5 million invaders until he had turned those 3 countries into chaos. Who turned them into chaos? George Soros, Russia, and China, to destabilize them because they knew that Mexico is run by drug cartels. Goes back to the Bushes. The rogue CIA and George Bush brought in the opium through the southern border of America. And that's how they got some of their slush funds. But mind you, they have the CIA World War II stolen gold that was taken from Ferdinand Marcos and his Filipino islands because they realized that the Yamashita gold had been buried and put in caves there. And there's plenty of evidence to show that it was dug up. So, Daddy Bush becomes the head of Barrick Gold, fake gold. Carlyle member, becomes a billionaire. And then, basically, becomes obsolete. He was the oil baron, the oil terrorist. That's the old way. In a few years, oil is going to be obsolete. We won't even be paying any attention to OPEC. That's the reason that Trump can turn around and tell OPEC what to do. Before OPEC told us what to do. But that's because we tricked them. We told them they had to buy U.S. Treasury bonds, and then we made them worthless. Or we sold them things that later we devalued. So don't worry about China coming into America. Let them buy everything they want. Later, we're going to buy it back for pennies on the dollar. China will be our vassal if we re-elect Trump. If we would have elected Hillary, she was a Bush family member from the beginning. Remember, it was the Harriman family that chose Bill Clinton. That was an arranged marriage, folks. Hillary Clinton and Bill Clinton don't have a child. Chelsea is not their child. And the entire setup in Arkansas was because it was the weakest state that had been using the slush fund of the Housing and Urban Development in the worst way of any state in the Union. So much corruption was already happening in northern Arkansas that they had to put a governor in there that could just let it run wild. And from before he was elected, they opened some Clinton foundations so that they could do dirty dealings. And those very Clinton foundations were then rolled into the Clinton Library, which is completely fake. The Clinton Library was absorbed by the Clinton Foundation so that the Clinton Foundation could take all the donations and all the given money from we the people to an ex-president to create his presidential library. As we know, Bill Clinton created one in Arkansas that he used as his place to meet his girlfriends. And so it basically became a bachelor pad for him. But at the same time, Walmart took over what you can see they took over in America. At the same time, Tyson Chicken was not charged. At the same time, all of the different gates, the water gates, the trooper gates, all the different gates, all the different lies. We can't even enumerate all of the Clinton lies. Remember, those are all Bush-approved lies. We have pictures of Bill Clinton sitting in Bush's backyard having a beer with him before Bill Clinton was ever the governor of Arkansas. So when you voted for Bill Clinton, you voted for the Bushes. And when you voted for Obama, or if you would have voted for Hillary, you were voting for the Bushes. It was going to be the same old story. Look at the Intelligence Community Report, Paradox of Progress. And you will see what was about to happen. Trump is the disruptor. So Daddy Bush, all I can say is, the fires of hell are going to have to be stoked really hot because you have been an agent of evil for as long as I have known of you. And in my opinion, you exude more evil than anyone except George Soros. And I think that your death, it's really sad that you didn't come to have some justice in your life, so that you wouldn't have to have such a bad life after death. Because I believe in karma. Many people don't. I believe in karma. All the bad you did is coming back to you right now. And no matter how many lies that people say at your funeral, it's not going to stop the demons that are going to have to come back and take from you what you took from others. I'm going to stop now because I'm painting a picture of evil that is so despicable that it is the perfect example of what America was about to become, but did not because of the Second American Revolution. George H.W. Bush was certainly a member of the Purple Revolution to allow George Soros' Open Society to take over this country in the 2016 election. It was the work of patriots who believed in that disruptor, Donald Trump, who were able to stand up to the White House, CIA, cabal that has been going on for so long that we don't even see it. It's standard operating procedure. For instance, no one believes Hillary will ever be convicted because why? Washington, District of Crime, is there to protect the Federalists. She's a Federalist. If you have had an office with the feds, then you have, if you're a high office, then you have basic impunity to steal whatever you want. Because when you get there, you look around like the senior executive service members and you say, hey, theft is happening everywhere. Look at the audits that are happening. Untold amounts of money thrown away, wasted, and consistent bureaucratic status quo rat lines streaming money to our enemies and to themselves, enriching themselves, and being directed by senior executive service members in all of the 64 branches of the federal government, which simply needs to be contracted and go back to the District of Columbia. We can end all of this. There's no problem. The federalism that was expanded by Daddy Bush, by George Herbert Walker Bush, and remember, when you say Herbert Walker, you're also telling another evil story I'm not even going to get into. The other evil stories around the families that married into the Bush, well, Prescott Bush was married into evil families, and that's where he learned it. And so this is a long dynasty. No one in this broadcast is going to be able to tell me who runs Velmet Bank. No one's going to be able to tell me George H.W. Bush's brother, who is as evil as him. You're not even going to be able to tell me he exists, because that's how well they can hide it. That's how their power works. And they're such con artists that those who sit in front of that TV looking at that presidential funeral are going to try to remember the good times. But here's one of the good times. When George H.W. Bush ran for office, they sent out a note and it said, here is the record of George H.W. Bush. You opened it and it was a blank 2 pages. And if you looked at the back page, it says, if you know of anything George H.W. Bush has ever done, please let us know. In other words, he covered his tracks as one of the top CIA people, one of the heads of the CIA, and no one knew it. No one knew the power and control this man had, even when he was in office. And when he was out of office, don't get me started. I told you only the tip of the iceberg of the involvement of George H.W. Bush with Barrick Gold, with the Carlyle Group, with Halliburton, with KBG, with Azerbaijan, with the rogue CIA. That's the tip of the iceberg. I literally could go on for hours and hours and hours, but I just want to say, good riddance to George Herbert Walker Bush. I'm glad that your old system is dying because we're shining bright lights on it, and the mold and the muck and the scum that has risen to the top is dissipating, and you're part of it.